introduce you to our host for the evening, the Deputy Consul General and the
man to restore a little bit of order. You're so welcome this evening, Fáilte to the Town Hall. And as Ger said, it's the fourth lecture in our historical lecture series. And I think the turnout tonight is really wonderful. And of course, it's a tribute to our distinguished speaker who's joined us this evening all the way from Ireland, Professor Ewan O'Halpin. I want to thank, in particular, Irish Network, Lurkin's here, Dan's here as well, and I want to thank the Trinity Alumni Network here in New York, Eileen's here up the front as well, with whom we present this lecture this evening. Welcome to all the TCD alums, of which I am one, I'm very proud to say, and welcome to all the Irish Networkers and all the other fantastic organisations that are represented here in the room this evening. I want to pay special tribute to our friends who have travelled from outside the city. Hello, Kingston. It's here in the room. Hi, Bob. Give it and also, of course, I want to acknowledge and pay tribute to Professor Maureen Murphy, who's here with us this evening, who's done so much to ensure that we have a really special programme of commemorative events here in New York, so far this year and right throughout the year. I'm sure with so many friends of Ireland in the room, you were watching the marvellous events in Dublin, and very moving events and inspiring events, which took place just over 10 days ago, and I know Trinity was very much a part of that. And if you'll forgive me for a moment before I introduce our speaker, I just want to look ahead very briefly to later this month. And I hope, as of now, the invitations will have hit your inboxes. If they haven't, Ger Shivlin will take your details at the back of the room. On the 24th of April, and we've mentioned this before at historical lectures, 24th of April, later this month, the Consulate, with a really wide-ranging team of community leaders and Irish American cultural and community institutions and organisations, have organised two very big events, and they'll take place at Battery Park City at the very tip of Manhattan, overlooking the Statue of Liberty. The first is a solemn commemorative ceremony which will mirror exactly what will happen at the GPO, with the participation of the fighting 69th Regiment of New York, Infantry Regiment of New York, and the Irish Defence Forces. Then after that there will be a day-long cultural celebration entitled Welcoming Ireland, capacity 8,000, spread the word. It's going to be absolutely marvellous. And tonight, we here at the Consulate really want this room, this place to be a place of ideas, a place of debate, a really good conversation. So I suppose we can explore and better understand our complex history and past to reimagine the future. It's like, I was looking at the Ireland 2016 programme today, and you'll know that the three themes are remember, reflect and reimagine. And look, this is what this evening's all about. And it's for that reason we're so delighted that we've been joined by such a distinguished professor in Ewan O'Halpin, who is a truly hugely respected voice in Ireland and internationally. I'm going to give you a very small highlights from his impressive CV. Professor O'Halpin is Bank of Ireland Professor of Contemporary Irish History and Director for the Centre for Contemporary Irish History at the University of Dublin Trinity College. He was educated at UCD in Cambridge, previously a Professor of Government at DCU. He's a member of the Royal Irish Academy, a Fellow of Trinity College, and a member of the Government's Expert Advisory Group on Commemoration. So Professor Halpin has kindly agreed to speak to you and to take some questions as well. So Professor Halpin, I give you the floor.
The proclamation, as I keep saying, is not a draft constitution for New Ireland. It's not even a declaration of a republic, it's a declaration of a republican government. It has very attractive elements, for example, women as well as men getting the vote, right? We'd all applaud that. But it postpones the exercise of the vote by anybody. And don't forget, the vote had been, Ireland was relatively democratic by 1916 as part of the United Kingdom. We can rule hiss the United Kingdom, but people, to the extent that they had representation in Britain, they had representation in Ireland. Or would it be achieved in September 1914? Now John Bruton, the former Taoiseach, argues that could have been a success. I don't agree with him, but we have to remember this. Democracy, for all its faults, had achieved a great deal in terms of the agenda, particularly of land reform, that had driven, if you like, the development of nationalism in Ireland in the 19th century. And yet, what the proclamation does is say we will have democracy in Ireland, including women as well as men. The franchise, or franchise is plural, it's puzzling use of the plural, but not yet. And this is a bit like St. Augustine. who you may remember, decided he was going to take up chastity, but in a while. There are a few things he wanted to try first. Because the proclamation says, until effectively there was a united Ireland, the united independent sovereign republic, were in charge. And so, in his day, associates of Mr. Adams, for example, until the late 1990s, whoever claimed to be the chief of staff of the IRA argued that he was the embodiment, not simply of the Republican tradition, but of the legitimate government and, curiously, Parliament of Ireland. So there are awkwardnesses as well as if you like, commendable parts in the proclamation. And I think, in my view, is that you value democracy for all its faults. But my view of a republican is somebody who believes in government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that differentiates me from, I think, many more recent converts to constitutional politics. But anyway, that's just me being grumpy. So I'm here today on a very wide canvas, and I probably I won't get to the start at this rate. But there's two aspects to it. One is a huge project which should be finished by now, but I promise it'll be finished shortly, called The Dead of the Irish Revolution. What I've attempted to do there is what at the first seemed like a simple task, which was to determine how many people died as a result of Irish political violence between the rising, from the start of the rising to the end of December 1921. What it has done for me is thrown out all sorts of interesting dimensions. If we take, for example, the 1916 Rising, the violence there and fatality are quite unlike the period from 1919 on, right? To take one example, in 1916, 20% of civilian casualties, which is the biggest category, were about 255 out of about 483 fatalities arising from the Rising directly, including executions, including policemen, including Irish volunteers, including everybody. Of them, 255 or so are civilians, of whom 20% are women. This is very unusual. It's quite unlike the period from 1917 to 21, where you far fewer female, I'd say female rather than women casualties. So I was surprised at that, and I thought about it and analysed it. And the reason for that is the nature of the fighting in Dublin, which is not the females were the target, it's because of where the battle was fought. And there's a question there, not only for the British Army in terms of using artillery, but for the rebels' choice of where they decided to fight. I said this in Dublin, and I'm not being entirely facetious. I suspect it was almost that they took a map of the city centre and they said, okay, let's navigate by maternity hospital. Because they picked the GPO, which is a hopeless military position anyway. It's adjacent to the Rotunda. They pick Marylebone Lane, which is adjacent to the Coombe. They pick Boland's Bakery, Boland's Mills, which is adjacent to Hollow Street, and so on and so on. They actually occupy a site, the South Dublin Union, which contains a hospital, which I'm a long-term client of. So there's very curious decisions which the consequences of which we can debate the wisdom of those decisions. We can certainly not say the intention was to bring death upon the civilian population of inner city Dublin, but that's what happened. But the point about the Rising from the rebels' point of view and from the police's point of view is this was not a secret army. This was an open, public activity. The people who rebelled were known to the police. Why? Because they paraded up and down every weekend. They wore uniforms, right? They operated like a formal open army. And by and large, they attempted to conduct themselves in that way. So they weren't, for example, there's no killing of alleged spies during the Rising, okay? You say, well, so what? Well, the IRA killed at least 186 civilians as supposed informers in 1920 and 21. So there's a big change in approach. There are no targeted assassinations. And there are not, on the Crown Forces side, there's no sort of, as it were, dirty war killings. There's a number of killings of prisoners, of civilians, which are atrocious. But there's no question of, well, we've no evidence against this guy, so we just go and shoot him. That certainly happens in 1920 and 21. In March 1916, the Citizen Army and the Irish Volunteers do a practice attack on Dublin Castle, right? And the police take note solemnly. Now we would call this a clue. Right? But they're told, well, nah, just let it lie. And even the British Army, the point about the Army in Ireland, because of immersion legislation, had enormous power. It effectively could act in lieu of the civilian courts. But the Army didn't want to put you on trial for sedition. You know why? Because they wanted to be on good terms with the public. You know why? Because they wanted him to join. The Army looked at Ireland as a source primarily for recruits, right? They don't want to be the police. They don't want to be the enforcers or whatever. So for a combination of factors, the castle doesn't act. On the intelligence side, though, the rebels are absolutely betrayed. And they're not betrayed by an informer, which is the great narrative of previous Irish rebellions, right? They're not betrayed by their insecurity, some idiot drunk in a bar, or it looks, we now know in more recent troubles, some idiot, not some idiot, but somebody personally compromised, and the police get a hold of them and say, look, you work for us or else, or we'll pay your debts, but you work for us. No, they're betrayed by who? They're betrayed by German incompetence. Don't rely on an external power. A, they don't care about you, and B, history shows they can't keep a secret. Anyway, that's the intelligence side of things. We might note, though, in terms of, I'm interested in 1916 partly because the Germans put a little bit of effort into Ireland. They put much more effort into the Middle East, much more effort into Central Asia. You know why? Because the Germans were fighting a war on the Eastern Front and their allies. And they thought, if we do this right, if we foment rebellion in Persia, if we get, my friends, the Afghans into the war, or even if we don't, but if the British think we're going to, it'll destabilise the British war effort. And they were quite right. The problem with Ireland was the Kaiser didn't care about Ireland. German generals didn't care about Ireland. Why? Because Ireland was of no strategic significance. And whatever else Germany was fighting a war for, it wasn't to make the subject people of Ireland free. But the irony is, of course, the Irish rebellion was the one that worked. And yet it's a mystery for me as an intelligence historian. What was the German plans if there was a rebellion in Ireland, Britain's back door? The curious thing is that the rising takes place in Britain's backyard, but it doesn't produce a political crisis remotely in Britain at all. And this is a big puzzle. And I'll just leave you finally, I have a further question, because this is a question and answer session, so I'm going to ask. But back to 1916, I'll end here because I know I've gone on too long. Dennis McCullough, who's the leader of the Irish Volunteers in Belfast, he says in his pensions narrative in 1935, he says he was summoned, he was told by Connolly and Pearse there's going to be a rising, and he's told his job is to take the volunteers from Belfast and to join up with volunteers from Tyrone and elsewhere and take them all to Galway, where they will fight, which is a very odd sort of arrangement. And he says Pearse and Connolly, but particularly Connolly, said there's not to be a shot fired in Ulster. Okay? Right? One of the mysteries of the Rising, because we can control the Irish volunteers, and in the end, of course, the volunteers assembled in Coal Island, and there was a bit of a misunderstanding, and there weren't enough people, and all under the nose of the police. And what they do is they dump their arms, they hide their arms, and they go back to Tyrone, they go back to Belfast. But what really amazes me, and it should amaze anybody, and this question is absolutely not explored, is how come there was no trouble in Belfast? In Belfast, in those years, it didn't take much to wind up a loyalist, right? So here were people going back, wearing Irish volunteer uniforms, obviously hadn't been out. We know there's a rebellion in Dublin by the same lot, and nobody in Belfast, the first thing you do is attack a Catholic pub. There's publicans, even in Protestant areas, most Republicans were Catholic. It's just a routine. They did that anyway on the 12th. And it's amazing that there's no sectarian violence in Belfast in that year. I think it's really very strange. It's commendable, thank God. But the Ulster question, the very fact that Connolly says we'll deal with Ulster later, shows, as for all nationalists and Republicans, the underlying problem in Irish history, which is the Ulster problem. Be it the 6-county problem, the 9-county problem, the 4-county problem, or the 32-county problem. Because nobody in 1916, any more than John Redmond, in terms of the Home Rule Act and bring it into operation, any more than Eamon de Valera, who comes over to meet Lloyd George after the truce here in summer 1921, sorry, not here, I beg your pardon, in London. Nobody had, on the Nationalist Republican side, had an answer to the question of not the morality, but the practicality of how could you coerce North East Ulster, let's call it that, that's what it was known as at the time, into a united Ireland. So everybody was being partitioned. The Rising itself was effectively partitioned because they put all of those, the Ulster question to late Ireland. So I think that 1916 and commemorating 1916, it behoves us to think critically. I don't mean in a condemnatory way, but it behoves us as citizens of whatever jurisdiction and whatever our political beliefs to look in the light of new evidence and to look in the light of the passage of time at the events of that era. And what we should all do is not simply sort of go, as it were, go with the flow too much. The state is being very, very assertive in ownership of 1916, I think quite rightly in 2016. That's partly because, I'll give you the final example of the national flag. It's partly because were the state not to do it, it would be done by others who have been the state's enemies. So there is a battle and a struggle going on about commemoration, even now, essentially between, if you like, the statists and people who would style themselves as the real Republicans. And you can guess which side I'm on. Thank you.
The role of the New York City Irish and the politicians in the Rising in the period thereafter up until the 1920s. But wasn't there support, both financial and otherwise, of Irish groups here in New York?
I should have paid you beforehand to ask that question. I'll pay you later. That's a great question. Yes, there was some support, absolutely. I mean, the 1916 Rising was planned largely in America, right, by Clan Gael, who are basically the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the North American branch, right? Well, that's a great question. But we haven't, I think that historians haven't been systematic and analytical about such questions, and we do tend, because people here are probably interested in Ireland, and many of you are American or whatever, and some of you are Trinity alumni, and so the idea, the Irish American is a bogey for British diplomacy in America throughout the 20th century, but in practice, I argue, it has the fundamental alliance between Britain and the United States. It has been enormously strong and has never been seriously undermined by the Irish.
I just want to say enormous thank you. That was such a spirited, engaging, thought-provoking, provocative, but really fascinating talk and Q&A session. So thank you on all our behalf and on behalf of the Consulate and Irish Network and TCD. Thank you so much. I just have two final things to say. Number one, we look forward to seeing you on the 24th of April with, of course, our beautiful flag, a lovely symbol of reconciliation, and, of course, with Oak Maher and the Defence Forces.